My name is Chuck Cummings. I'm the playwright of Billie Sits for Carl, Annotated. If you want to know more about my play, listen to this recording. You know what's kind of interesting for me is that I remember in high school, I hated theater. I remember, I think our English teacher took us on a field trip to a production of Cyrano de Bergerac. And I thought, that's the most boring thing I've ever seen. It was really interesting. I didn't embrace Shakespeare. There were lots of things that I didn't like about theater. And it really wasn't until I got into my 20s that everything kind of flipped around regarding theater. I remember, thank God for PBS. I remember just randomly watching a production of 6 Characters in Search of an Author, and it just blew me away. And I thought, and in a way that kind of spoke to the type of theater that I like. Sometimes I don't necessarily like theater that's straight ahead kitchen drama. I don't necessarily like theater that forgets that television was invented 70 years ago. Before television, obviously, theater was, aiming for verisimilitude and all these other things. And since then, I think there's a growing challenge to theater to not be television. So anyway, it wasn't until in my 20s that I really embraced theater. I decided to write a play that won this competition. And I later in life really decided that theater was for me. I've been a writer all my life, though I didn't realize it. I remember in like 7th grade in a history exam, I didn't want to answer the question in the way that the history teacher wanted me to answer it. And so to get my point of view across, I actually wrote a mini play in my history exam. It just spoke to me to write it this way. I created 2 characters who spoke to each other so that I could present different issues. And I remember the history teacher writing me this note going, okay, this is kind of amazing what you did. But I didn't really pay attention to that. But throughout my life, I've been a writer. And just the older I got, the more I kind of realized that, because, my early programming was, go to law school, go to, become this business person, whatever. And so it just took a while to get to that place where I realized, oh yeah, this is what I do and I can do it well. And so I always do it, but it comes out in many different forms. And those of you who see this QR code, I'm trying to point to it and I'm not sure which direction to point. You'll see that my writing, quote unquote, isn't just words on paper necessarily. It's also virtual reality, extended reality. I like different things, but it is all writing, the organizing of ideas. Theater is unique, i.e. different from television, different from movies, different from writing an article for a journal or magazine. I think, okay, and this is the, nerdy geek side of me. I actually think that we don't yet realize that live theater is engaging on a different level because, there's pheromones or something floating around that causes a reaction in people. Again, science maybe 60 years from now will tell us, oh yeah, the beta pheromone is what makes live encounters different from virtual encounters. But when done well, writing for theater, I think is unsurpassed in terms of what it can evoke. And who knows why? But I think that it behooves playwrights to recognize and leverage our difference from television, from movies, and try to understand what it is about a live experience that's different from an experience where someone is just watching a video per se or reading an article. This is also something that it took me years to understand, but I'm a person who usually likes to start from factual evidence. I wrote a play, well, actually, the first play that I wrote that won this competition was a competition run by the National Archives. And you had to base your play on actual material found in the National Archives branch. And so I did all this research and fashioned a play that stood on very sturdy factual legs. And that has tended to be my process. I don't necessarily understand why, but there's this part of me that feels that I am beholden to tell the truth. And I like telling truths that are factually supported, even though I then can sometimes get wildly creative with it. But it's a weird obsession on my part. I think it's the part of me that almost went to law school and is still holding over as playwriting. So my process is immersing myself in factual material. The play that I'm working on now is very heavily derived from factual material. And then I try to take that and turn it into something else. And sometimes that can happen. That can take a long time to happen before I get the right inspiration. I often am a heavy outliner. I know that different people have different opinions of outlining. I tend to be a heavy outliner, even though I know that once I get into the play itself, the outline can go out the window. But I do like to try to know what the end is, know the direction I'm heading. I know other writers who, they just write and write and write, and the shape comes over time. But I've never been one of those writers. Let me first mention that the play, Billie Sits for Carl, Annotated, yes, Annotated is part of the title. It's about an actual visit that Billie Holiday, the jazz singer, made to a photographer named Carl Van Vechten, who lived in Manhattan. This visit at Carl Van Vechten's Central Park West apartment happened in 1949. And I'm exploring not only what happened in terms of the fireworks between the two of them, the friction between the two of them, the night of the photo shoot at the apartment, but some greater truths. And this particular idea has probably been percolating at some level in my head for close to 20 years. Yeah, 20. He said 20, 20. Because I saw an art exhibit of the photographs of Carl Van Vechten a long time ago at a museum in Miami. And I was just struck by this documentation of people like Ella Fitzgerald and Paul Robeson and Billie Holiday and others. And that was basically the seed that eventually turned into Billie Sits for Carl. So I guess that's it's also a statement about how sometimes I write fast and sometimes I don't. Sometimes things just take a while before they really click. And then I really have to get it out. So basically, in the fall of 2021 was when the idea really came back to me again. And so it took me about 6 months to get the play together, 6-7 months. But that's what Billie Sits for Carl, Annotated is. It's basically a seed that started germinating 20 years ago. The main characters, as I mentioned before, are Billie Holiday and Carl Van Vechten, and they actually did meet on, I think it was March 23rd, 1949, for a photo shoot that lasted all night. In the real story, also there was the wife of Carl Van Vechten, Fania Marinoff. She is in this play. And also the assistant slash occasional lover of Carl Van Vechten, Saul Maraber. He was also there that night. And there's also an additional character in this play, the playwright, who is manipulating what happens on this particular night. So the general story arc is that when Billie Holiday arrives, there are certain types of pictures that Carl Van Vechten wants to get from her. Specifically, one of the things that I found in my research was, and this is spoiler alert for anyone who's interested, it's just a reading, so there's no such thing as spoilers spoiling readings. But one of the things I found is that Carl Van Vechten, this married gay man, also sometimes liked to take photographs of women's breasts. And there are a couple of pictures, for example, of Carl Van Vechten doing topless photos of this old Broadway / movie star named Pearl Bailey, who was, very famous in the latter half of the 20th century. And so within the construct of the play, that's one of Carl's goals with Billie. Will he be able to get her to go that far? But of course, this is also the playwright speaking. I'm talking about the playwright in the play. So you can't necessarily believe what the playwright is manipulating these characters to do. But the overall arc is about this photo session and what will happen in this photo session. And it touches on my love for non-cliched, non-traditional goals in theater. I certainly appreciate the plays that can tug my heartstrings and make me cry. I'm an easy crier. So, there are commercials on television that bring me close. But I'm not trying to do that in this play. I'm actually hoping that this particular play will stimulate certain conversations, some about race, but actually more about truth and manipulation of truth, and what is appropriate and what is not appropriate in terms of our manipulation of truth. I mean, our whole lives depend on stories, which are manipulations of truths. All of our lives are dependent on stories which manipulate us and aren't necessarily true. George Washington did not chop down a cherry tree, even though we were taught that as kids. So there is an exploration of what's appropriate in terms of the manipulation of truth. But even more than that, what's interesting is that one of my guiding principles in playwriting is I want people to be entertained. I know it's a bad word, but I want people to step out of that theater with a renewed knowledge and interest in the characters that were on the stage, and also a feeling of, hey, that was worth my 2 hours or whatever. So I know that that's an odd thing for a playwright to say, but I do want the experience to be worthwhile to the audience. And that whole question of why voices need to be heard, more voices need to be heard in the theater world. Our society continues to change. And if our society is going to be a vibrant society, then all voices need to be heard. Otherwise, people will stop engaging. We're subscribers at the Amundsen, and the Amundsen confronts that problem every season because the audiences are getting older and older. If the Amundsen can embrace new voices in theater, which they've done, as has the Mark Taper Forum. I loved Slave Play. I loved the whole concept of the blackout nights. Went to see Blues for an Alabama Sky. It was fantastic. Without embracing those new audiences, theater will die because there are not enough people of a specific subgenre to support theater. So it's vital for the health of the theater that more and more types of people are represented on stage. There is no substitute for getting out of our writing silos and participating in a creative group. I've got a playwriting group that I'm in, Playwrights Inc., which is just fantastic. We give each other feedback. We tell each other about opportunities. Any opportunity that you have to get out of your little silo that you have maybe put yourself in is going to benefit you creatively. And, this is Los Angeles. People think it's not a theater town. It is indeed a theater town. Even more importantly, I consider it a creative town. I consider LA to be perhaps the most creative city in the United States, in that we attract people from all over, not just for movies and television, but to create things, whether it's artistically, whether it's in print. I definitely encourage people to continue to, again, reach out, interact with other people. It benefits you creatively. Without our help, without donations, without doing whatever you can in whatever way to help a theater company survive, these places will go out of business. There are financial necessities that they have to basically adhere to. And they can't live on box office alone, especially when they are trying to put something forward that's experimental, that's a little different. They need your support to continue to do that. And if you're an artistic director somewhere and are interested in doing a full production of Billie Sits for Carl, Annotated, let me know. Hey, you can even contact me through my website. I wonder how you get to my website. So I would love to have a full production of this play. There are certain elements of the play, in fact, that won't be present during the reading. I negotiated with the Carl Van Vechten Foundation to actually use his photos in the play, but the reading is all about the words of the play. So although in a full production, there are many photos which are going to be displayed for dramatic reasons, but I fully encourage and fully hope for a full production at some point in time. Hi, my name is Chuck Cummings. I'm the playwright of Billie Sits for Carl, Annotated. See you at the theater.